Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm the Conservation Coordinator for Farm and Wilderness Conservation. A few quick notes before we get started. Please try to remain muted during the presentation so we don't have that echo going on. And then you're welcome to keep your video on or off, whichever you are most comfortable with. We are recording tonight's session and it's going to be available on our YouTube channel, so just keep that in mind. If you have any questions throughout this presentation, feel free to put those in the chat or write them down, and then we're going to spend some time at the end answering any questions that have come up in the chat. I think that's all of our quick housekeeping things. We're so excited to welcome Dana Williams from the Vermont Center for Ecostudies this evening. Dana is the Community Science Coordinator at VCE, where she helps community members contribute to conservation efforts across the state. Previously, she worked in nature education for all ages as the program director at Williamstown Rural Lands, which is a small land trust in Massachusetts. Dana holds a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of California, where she researched the social relationships of animals. We've so been looking forward to this presentation for a while. So honored to have Dana here with us. So thank you, Dana. Thank you, Vermont Center for Eco-Studies, for this wonderful opportunity. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dana.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Does that look like it's coming through properly? Okay, cool. All right, so as Elizabeth said, my name is Dana Williams. I'm the Community Science Coordinator for the Vermont Center for Ecostudies. And I like to say that I am a mammologist, not an entomologist, but part of my mammology includes our human volunteers. So at VCE, we are a scientific nonprofit that partners with local communities to engage in biodiversity research and monitoring. And today we're going to explore a little bit about the butterflies of Vermont and how we work to conserve them through the Vermont Butterfly Atlas. So my screen will work. All right. You may not know it, but humans have an obsession with butterflies. And while it didn't necessarily start in the Victorian era, if you know anything about the Victorian era, like many things in natural history, the Victorian era certainly highlights why butterfly collectors attribute their pursuit similar to using cocaine or other drugs, and none more so than Margaret Elizabeth Fontaine. So Margaret was born in Norfolk, England, as the eldest of 7 children, with a social status and inherited money to back it up. And after many long years pursuing a failed marriage pursuit of an alcoholic, she decided to turn her life around and began traveling at the age of 27 to France and Switzerland and other places in Europe. And there she encountered her first spark butterflies. These were the scarce swallowtail, that looks very similar to our tiger swallowtails, and the Camberwell beauty, which we know as the mourning cloak. And as she began scrambling through rural fields with butterfly net in hand, her interest grew into a very serious pursuit of entomology, which is the study of insects. And she began visiting the collections of Royal Society lepidopterists, which are people who study moths and butterflies. And she ended up expanding her travels to Sicily and Austria and France. And she began publishing her records of what butterfly species lived in different places and what habitats they used. She ended up collecting and raising caterpillars, investigating which plants were their host plants, or the types of plants that a species is uniquely adapted to eat. In 1898, this earned her a spot as the 12th woman to join the Royal Entomological Society, with the support of her many mentors and forebears, both men and women. And even as a woman in a highly rigid social society, she often traveled alone, or even with her partner Khalil. She ended up visiting over 60 countries across Europe, Africa, Asia, and North America. She published numerous natural history articles and ended up collecting and preserving over 22,000 specimens of butterflies. These specimens are now housed in the Norwich Castle Museum and the British Museum of Natural History. And these are preserved along with her 12 diaries that she kept during all of these expeditions, which were released in 1978, kept after her death for various reasons, including that she had a number of scandalous romantic encounters that she feared would shock Victorian society. But at age 77, she went on a collecting trip in the West Indies and Trinidad, where she was searching for rare specimens with names like cryptic satyr, Smith's pixie, and spear-winged cattleheart. And while she was out, she unfortunately suffered a heart attack while she was on the paths behind the Mount St. Benedict Abbey. One of the brothers later discovered her dead amongst the Caribbean pine and tropical bracken fern, and she was still wearing her man's shirt sewn all over with large pockets that held all of her jars and boxes for collecting butterflies, and her butterfly net was still clutched, determined in her hand. But we don't just love butterflies because they drive us to defy social norms and traipse all over the world in search of them. They also invoke feelings of whimsy and serve as symbols of transformation and freedom. They appear again and again in human stories, such as the Palakmana of the Hopi mythology, a butterfly maiden who pollinates fields and brings the spring rain. They're also used as representation of the immortal souls of the butterfly lovers, which is one of the four great folk tales of China. And they also represent the souls of the ancestors following the monarch's migration back to Mexico on Dia de los Muertos. And they're also important parts of our ecosystems. They have fuzzy bodies that help carry pollen between flowers, ensuring that those flowers continue to exist through the process of pollination. And their caterpillars are vital, nutrient-rich food sources for baby birds, even hummingbirds. And while we might not think of this as a positive, caterpillars and butterflies are also a critical support system for parasitic insects, who are still critical pieces of biodiversity, even if we think of them as a little less savory. Overall, they help us educate children about the wonders of nature in butterfly houses. They draw tourists by the tens of thousands to their wintering grounds, and they help us understand processes of metamorphosis and mimicry in the laboratory. Butterflies even contribute over $100 million in pollination services to the cotton industry in Texas, although of course they can also act as a pest as well. However, butterflies are unfortunately in decline. A recent study on the state of butterflies in the United States found that butterfly populations in the Northeast have dropped by a third over the past 20 years, which means that for every 3 butterflies that you would have seen in Vermont 20 years ago, nowadays you're only going to be seeing 2. But these population changes differ by species, with some species enjoying a boost from the warm temperatures of climate change, moving up from the south, and while others struggle with all the usual culprits such as habitat degradation, pesticide exposure, and invasive species. And also for many species, we don't even know enough about them to be able to estimate their current or future populations. And without these estimates, these species get left out of conservation management plans. In fact, in the words of Zadok Thompson, who was Vermont's first colonial naturalist, of the great majority of insects, scarcely anything is known, either good or evil. And we can back that up with data. This is a paper from 2023 looking at the status of species around the world. It's broken up by the silhouetted categories that you can see on the bottom. And the color in the bars represent how many species have populations that are increasing, stable, decreasing, or unknown. And if you look on the right side of the graph, you can see that those bars have a really big section of gray, or that unknown category, for both insects and fish. In many cases, species are going extinct before we know what habitats they use, or sometimes even before we know that they even exist. However, if you look at another certain bar, this one with the bird on it, you can see that the bar has a lot more color on it. And that's because of birders, also known as people who are willing to travel to all ends of the earth on their own dime to look for any kind of bird species. So in Vermont, we've been working to fill in those insect data gaps. In 1995, the state led a study to document butterflies and moths, but likely due to budget and staff limits, they were only able to cover these 22 sites, which you can see are mostly focused around Burlington. And while this provided us with a nice baseline list of butterfly species and where they might be, it's not exactly a comprehensive survey of the entire state. So in 2002, my colleague Kent McFarlane was sitting around the office and he said, you know what? We don't know enough butterflies. We should run a butterfly atlas. And so he revived this effort in the first Vermont Butterfly Atlas. But instead of professional biologists, the atlas took a page out of birders' books and encouraged the public to get involved in conservation efforts that were quite literally happening in their own backyards. And these people are community scientists. And what is community science? You've probably heard of it in any of the number of different names that it's been given, citizen science or participatory science, but they all refer to the same thing, which is that people are volunteering their time to help scientists do scientific research. And it might look like anything from communities addressing their needs and coming up with scientific questions to address those. It might be volunteers hiking up a mountain at 4 a.m. to collect data on birds, or even it might be helping scientists to run analyses and write up papers or reports about it. And it turns out that Vermont is really good at community science. So this is from one of our reports looking at contributions through places like apps like iNaturalist and eBird. And Vermont by far leads the country in the number of observations compared to our population. You can tell not only from the dark green on the map, but if you look at the little insert on the left, we are so far ahead of the next state, which is Montana. So tapping into this well of enthusiasm that Vermonters have for the environment, for 5 years, the first Vermont Butterfly Atlas had 149 volunteers who turned in observations and samples from all over the state that were to be analyzed by biologists. They ended up recording for the first time these 12 new species to the state. And in total, the data provided the information necessary to assign species of greatest conservation need ranks to 103 species for the first time. Species records were also able to be updated with state extirpations or localized extinctions, like the regal fritillary, which I believe their population is now constrained to the Midwest. And they were also able to add newly recorded populations for rare butterflies like the West Virginia white. And now we're the first state in the nation undertaking a second butterfly atlas. And this is to update our records after 20 years of land use change, invasive species, climate change, and all of the other known threats to butterfly populations. This data will allow us to ensure that the new state wildlife action plan that's coming out this year, as well as other pollinator conservation efforts, have accurate recent data to rely on. So we just finished up year 3 this summer of the atlas, and we've already recorded 4 new species, including the red-banded hairstreak, which was observed by our volunteer Kevin Hemian just this past August. So I'm going to try and do this. Usually I do this in front of audience, but I want you all to take a guess at how many species of butterflies you think there are in Vermont. And you can put which letter you think it is into the chat. And I'm going to see if I can switch screens so I can see that. Okay, I'll give people a couple more seconds. We got 2 answers, C and B. We got 2 for C. Oh, I took out the right answer. We'll do which one's closest then. All right, so because I edited this last minute, I actually edited out the correct answer accidentally, but A is closest. There are actually 120 species currently on the list in Vermont. So the second Vermont Butterfly Atlas currently has over 700 participants who have submitted 33,000 butterfly sightings through websites like iNaturalist or eButterfly. And from this data, we also now know that butterfly species diversity differs by biophysical region, from 89 species in the Taconic Mountain region, which is that dark brown in the southwest part of the state, to only 70 species up in the Northeast Kingdom. And I've circled Plymouth here, which lies in the southern Green Mountains and has the second lowest diversity of species at 75 species. And one of the core missions for the Vermont Butterfly Atlas and the Vermont Center for Ecostudies is to make sure that our data is always available to the public. And you can find all the information collected on butterflies in Vermont on the Vermont Butterfly Atlas website. which you can use to look up information about each butterfly, including descriptions of their behavior, their habitat, their phenology, their life cycle, and also their Vermont-specific flight times or when they're flying as adults. So now that we have all this data, what does it get used for? Well, like I said, one of the things is updating our species of greatest conservation need. This is our list in Vermont that ranks all of our different species in the state and kind of tells managers which ones are in most need of conservation. And as you can see, our forest butterflies are the ones that are kind of really struggling the most. And as one example of this, this is the early hair streak, which is a little light green butterfly with a brilliant blue on the inside of its wings. They spend almost their entire life cycle hanging out in the canopies of the North American beach, and very rarely they'll descend down to the surface of a dirt road to sit around and lick up salts, and which is also to the delight of butterfliers who will come from far and wide to walk these dirt roads in the spring in hopes of seeing this very rare butterfly. But as you've probably seen from your hometowns, the North American beech is threatened by both beech bark disease and now beech leaf disease. And since butterfly caterpillars are often adapted to survive the chemical defenses of only one plant species or a suite of related species, once those host plants disappear, so do the butterflies. This makes protecting American beech that are resistant to this disease very crucial to the survival of this butterfly, as well as looking for any other ways to protect beech against these diseases. Another species that I wanted to highlight just because I think they're fun, mostly because they seem to have the opposite problem of the early hair streak in that they've just evolved to make their lives harder. These are dainty little butterflies. They're the smallest of the coppers, and they will only sip drops of dew and nectar from the flowers of the bog cranberry and the American cranberry. They're very weak flyers. They can barely get off the ground, which restricts their entire lives to just one little section of a single acid bog. That makes them, as a population, very much at the whims of their environment, since they can't really recruit new individuals from other populations. Now, bog copper adults are only out for a few weeks a year, and the rest, 85% of the rest of their lives is spent as an egg. And this is partly because these bogs flood occasionally, and the eggs have special adaptations to help them survive underwater. Now, these butterflies rely entirely on this habitat to survive, making the preservation of acid bogs a top priority for their conservation. Now, you might be wondering, well, that sounds fun. How can I join the Second Vermont Butterfly Atlas? So first, what you can do is visit one of two websites, either ebutterfly.org or inaturalist.org. These are both community science websites that allow you to send in observations of butterflies that you see. They work on two different ways. eButterfly is what's called a checklisting site. So that means you go out and you make a list of all the species you see, and you mark the number of individuals you see over a certain time period. iNaturalist, on the other hand, is more of what we call a point count. So you go out and you take a picture of a butterfly that you see, and you just upload that single observation. So you don't need to be out for, a certain period of time. For both of these websites, you'll need to make an account, and then you can find a place to go butterfly. Now, any butterfly observation that you submit in the state of Vermont goes into the atlas. But you can give us some extra help by visiting the Butterfly Block Mapper, which is on that Vermont Butterfly Atlas website. And if you see this map, you can see there's a bunch of red blocks. And those are our priority blocks, or places that we would really love volunteers to help us get out and document what's in that area. And finally, you can grab your gear and just go out. And like we were talking about in the beginning, even though it's the end of October and we've had our first frost, somehow there's a couple of butterfly species that are still hanging on. So you could jump into this project now if you wanted to. Now, if you are a beginner butterfly watcher, you might be thinking, well, that sounds really fun. There's 120 species in Vermont. That seems like a lot. But not to worry, we're going to walk through a couple of butterfly basics here tonight. So the first question is, of course, what is a butterfly? Now we've got two species up on the screen. The one on the left is the eastern-tailed blue. That is our butterfly, compared to our puta which is a moth. Now we've got a couple of different characteristics that we can look at that helps us tell the difference between them. The first being, if you look at the background of these photos, you can tell that the butterfly is out during the day, and the moth is probably under someone's porch light at night. And that's because butterflies are diurnal, or they are primarily active during the day, and moths are primarily nocturnal or active at night. However, this characteristic is a little bit tricky because if you've ever walked around in the grass, you've probably kicked up a lot of moths. And that's because there are actually a lot of day flying moths. So when you use this characteristic, you usually want to pair it with something else, such as wing position. So if you look at our eastern-tailed blue, butterflies often land with their wings closed, while moths will have their wings open. Butterfly wings will also be resting above their head, while moths will have their wings resting behind their head. Another helpful feature is the antenna. If you look at the antenna of the eastern-tailed blue, you can tell that it's got a little club on the end. And either clubbed or hooked antenna are indicative of butterflies, while moths can have all sorts of other kinds of antenna. This one here has what we call an unadorned antenna, which means it doesn't really have anything fancy on it. But if you've seen pictures of moths, you've probably seen those really feathery antenna. Those are usually males, but that's another form that the antenna in moths can take. Another characteristic is that butterflies often have brighter colors on their wings. The eastern-tailed blue is maybe not the best example of that, but if you think of a monarch, they have, this brilliant orange color. While when you think of moths, you probably think of browns and whites and grays, kind of these duller colors. And part of that is because of that first characteristic, in that butterflies are active during the day and moths are active at night. And colors are very expensive to produce, and you only want to produce them if they have a purpose. For butterflies, colors can either warn predators away, saying, I'm poisonous, don't eat me, or they can attract mates to them. But at night, if a lot of animals can't see colors, then there's no reason for the moths to be investing in those expensive pigments. Another characteristic that can be a little bit harder to see, unless you have your species or your specimens displaying for you like they are here, is that the bodies of butterflies tend to be relatively slender and hairless, while the bodies of moths are kind of thicker and hairier. So there are over 20,000 species of butterflies in the world and 120 species found in Vermont so far, which seems like a lot to learn, especially when you usually see them like this. They're either really, really small and far away, or they're flying by you really quickly in a blur. But as you can see from all these pictures, all of them have been identified either to species or genus level, which just goes to say you don't have to take a flawless picture of a butterfly to contribute to this research. So I'm going to run through pretty quickly my basic guide to IDing butterflies by what's easiest, which is looking at them for color and size. So for sizes, we're going to use not my real credit card like I did for the first presentation I did, but a basic card. If you look on the lengthwise, that's how big a large butterfly is. If you turn it, so you're looking at the width, that's about how big a medium-sized butterfly is. A small butterfly is about the size of a quarter, and our extra small butterflies are about the size of a penny. So our first butterflies are our yellow-white butterflies. If you see anything that is yellow and white, it is going to be one of these three categories, which makes it pretty easy to narrow down. So our first category are swallowtails. They are a large group of butterflies. They can be even bigger than this, up to the width of your phone. And they are predominantly yellow with black patterns, and they have tails on the ends of their wings. Now, a couple of them can be tricky. Some of our less common ones in the state can be fully black with yellow patterns instead. Now moving down a little bit smaller, if you twist your card to look at the medium size, even though it says small, they're medium. Anything that is bright, bright yellow is probably one of our sulfur species. And about that size or a little bit smaller, anything that is white is going to be one of the white butterflies, which is easy to remember. Although these ones can be, if you're looking closely, they can have a little dusting of mustard yellow on their wings as well. So moving on to our large orange butterflies. These ones are going to be the same size as the swallowtails. And they're easy to tell apart by the different patterns that they have on their wings. So if it's got dots and waves, then it's going to be one of our fritillaries. Everyone's probably familiar with a monarch. If you see an orange and black butterfly that has these strong veins, then it's going to be either the monarch or the similar looking viceroy. If you see a splotchy kind of painted colored or painted patterned butterfly with these strong black tips with white dots on them, then that's going to be one of our lady species. Now, orange is a very popular color in butterflies, so size becomes important in this group. These are our medium to small orange butterflies. So starting with our medium orange butterflies, the commas have black dots on their wings, but their most obvious feature is that the edges of their wings are very rough. They look kind of misshapen compared to the smooth, kind of rounded wings that you usually see on butterflies. And this is because they're one of our early species that comes out right when leaves are coming out or before leaves when there's bark, and they want to kind of blend in with that. Moving down in size to kind of our smaller butterflies, crescents are a little bit bigger than a quarter, and they will be absolutely everywhere when they come out, which is later in the summer. They have a strong orange and black patterning, which varies a lot between individuals, which makes it hard to tell. And there's a little asterisk up at the top by the crescents because this one, you don't have to grab your book to break it down to species because you actually can't field identify them down to species anyways. Last in this group are coppers. These ones are mostly silver, but they have a really prominent orange patch on their forewings. And they also have a bunch of black dots. Kind of easy to tell apart from the other oranges. Last for our orange crew are what I call our Halloween colored butterflies. These are the skippers. They're Halloween both because they are black and orange and also because they are a giant family of butterflies that is scary to think about trying to get down to species for. So they're typically small. Unlike other butterflies, they often will rest with their wings slightly open. You can see here with the European skipper, the forewing and the hindwing are held separate at like a 45-degree angle. This makes them pretty distinctive when they're landing on grass and you're looking at them. They also have a very like triangular shape you can see in the silver spotted skipper compared to kind of the more rounded side profile of other butterflies. There are 6 skippers that can help you kind of break down this family a little bit, and these are the spread wing skippers. They're also usually small, but they're always this sooty gray and black color. And unlike the other skippers, they will often land with their wings held out flat. Next are our blue and gray butterflies. The larger of the two groups are hair streaks. These ones are very fun to see because they're a little bit, they're a forest butterfly and they're a little less common to see. They are small to medium butterflies, a little bit bigger than a quarter. And they'll often have these white and black stripes on their wings. And almost all of them have orange or blue in that little section down on the hind wing. Comparatively, the blues and azures are pretty much all silver. They look a little bit like the coppers where they've got that silver patterning with the black dots, but they don't have that prominent orange. In fact, this species, the eastern-tailed blue, is the only one that has orange dots on it. The rest of them are just kind of blank silver. Both of these groups, the hair streaks and the blues, will have this really brilliant blue inside to their wings. They're very pretty to see. Then we kind of have an assortment of what I call the other butterflies. There are 7 species that have these prominent eye marks on their wings. These are the pearly eye, wood nymphs, wood satyrs, and browns. They tend to be forest butterflies, and the eyes are believed to affect predator attention. either by mimicking something like a scary eye that's looking at you to scare away the predators, or redirecting the predators to the wrong kind of face of the butterfly. So they take a chunk out of the wing instead of chomping down on the butterfly's actual head. Then we have a whole collection of butterflies that just don't really look like anything else in Vermont, and they can be relatively easy to look through a book and immediately tell what they are. My favorite of these is the red-spotted admiral. These ones are this really black color with these broad white bands. And this is a butterfly that I can say I have been able to identify from my car on I-91. That's how kind of prominent and obvious that white band is. Another one of these that's kind of a funny butterfly is the hackberry emperor. They look a little bit like the ladies in that they have that orange and black pattern with the strong kind of black tips to their wings. But for some reason, the emperors all like to hang out facing upside down. So when they land, their head will always be pointed towards the ground, which is not what any other butterfly does. Another butterfly that's a common favorite is the Baltimore checker spot. These ones are very pretty. They have this broad black coloration with these orange and white spots, and they tend to hang out near wetlands because their host plant is the white turtlehead. And last, another favorite of everybody's is Milbert's tortoiseshell. This one kind of looks like a Cheshire cat if you look closely. There's these little eyes that are appearing close to their body, and then they have this big orange band across the edge of their wings that looks kind of like a smile. So this unique features group has a bunch of other butterflies, but again, they all have really distinct features like these ones do. So another thing that people often mention when they're getting into butterflies is that photography is really difficult, or taking a picture of butterflies is very difficult because they don't like to hold still. So here's a couple of tips for what you can try to do to try and get some of those pictures to upload to places like iNaturalist or eButterfly. So first, it's important for you to show those characteristics to help people identify the butterflies down to species. And the best places to find specific characteristics for species is either on the top of their wings, which is when their wings are open, like in the first picture, or on the underside of the wings, which is when their wings are closed, like the second picture. Another tip for photography is take pictures when they are really far away. So this is a butterfly that I saw land on a flower a couple feet from me, and I immediately took out my phone and took a picture. And it might be a little bit hard to see. There is a little bit of an orange blob right in the middle. So first, we know it's an orange butterfly. And then you take a step closer, and if the butterfly doesn't fly away, you can take another picture. And here you can see we have kind of better quality. This one is orange and black, and it kind of looks like it's got some black tips on its wings, which would make it potentially that lady group. Then we take a step closer, and we can finally get a good picture of this butterfly if they're cooperating with us. And from here, we can see not only is it definitely one of those ladies, but also if you know your butterflies, you can look at the dots on the hind wing or the kind of back end of the butterfly and see that they're all different sizes from each other. And that can tell us that this is an American lady butterfly. Another tip is to take a video of a butterfly. Oh, that's going to not open up. Okay. And when you are looking through that video, you can grab a still shot from it, and that can help you get kind of a more clear picture of what you're looking at. And so you might be thinking, well, that's great. Now I know a little bit about basic butterfly ID, and I know that there's a couple butterflies flying around right now, but it's almost winter, and most butterflies are not flying around in the winter. So what else can I do? And one thing winter is great for is planning, especially if that planning involves gardens. And if you are not quite sure where to start, then I have a story from Terry Ciccini that can give you some help. So Terry was an engineer at Green Mountain Power who ran a raptor rehabilitation nonprofit called Outreach for Earth Stewardship out of the Shelburne Farms property. When he retired in 2011, he decided he was going to dive straight into the world of gardening. And he was particularly interested in supporting monarchs. And so when he was walking around the farm, he found an unused field and he asked if he could add a milkweed garden to it. But while he was getting together all of his supplies to put in this milkweed garden, he came across the first Vermont Butterfly Atlas. And when he looked through it, he found out that there were actually 40 different species of butterflies who were living in the fields around him. And he decided, well, monarchs are great, but 40 species of butterflies would be even better. And so he scoured a bunch of books and looked all over the internet, and he found the host plants for all of those other butterflies. He figured out which of those plants was most likely to grow in the field, put together his list, and then set off to the nursery with that list in hand. Now, just last Friday, we were visiting Terry as he showed us around his garden. And although the garden process has become a little bit messier than it was initially planned to be, Terry thinks that's a really good thing because the garden has grown beyond just butterflies, and he's been able to provide sandy patches for ground nesting bees. He's added host plants for various moth species. He's taken all the leaves that they blow off the lawns at Shelburne Farms and stuffed them around the bases of his plants, so all of his insects have nice, cozy places to overwinter. And he's also added little bird baths for water to attract birds in and also give insects a quick sip. Now there's over 60 plant species, some of which have come from the survivors of that original list, and others have been just duly snatched up from free front porch forum posts. And he knows that his garden has been very successful because his colleague Craig Newman has documented over 1,200 observations of insect visitors on iNaturalist. So you can do this in your own yard. I'm going to walk through the resources that you can use for these 3 steps, and you can, of course, do this at any scale. So first, you can figure out what's living near you with iNaturalist. You can also do this with the Vermont Butterfly Atlas website, but iNaturalist provides kind of nicer pictures, so that's why I go to that one. So if you go to iNaturalist, when it first comes up, you'll see in the upper left-hand corner, there's a little navigation bar, and you can click that Explore button, and it will bring you to this page, which is showing you all the most recent observations that people have made from all over the world, which is not quite helpful for us, but if you look at this little magnifying glass, then you can fill in a specific species or a group of species, such as butterflies, and you can also fill in a location, and that can be a country, state, or town. And then you hit go, and it will bring you to this page, which gives you a list of all the observations people have made about that species or group in that area that you asked for, and they're ordered by the most recently seen visitors. You can explore further on this page by selecting species, which will just show you the species that are most common for your area. And you can also click on the map, and it will give you a spatial map of all where the observations have been taken. So if you want to look for something that's really close to your house, for example. And for all of this, you don't need an account to look at the data that they show you. So I just pulled up a list of the most commonly reported butterflies in Plymouth, Vermont. And some of them we've already seen in our butterfly basics. These are examples of butterflies that you can lure into your garden. Many of them are ones that are common pretty much anywhere. And so you can read up on these species and put together a list of butterflies that you're either interested in or just the ones that you expect to see. And if you want to take it a little farther, you can also go to that State of the Butterflies report and find the Northeast table. And if you look at this, you can see on this 20-YR with the triangle, that shows you the amount of change that has happened to that population over the past 20 years. So you can match up your butterflies with their kind of population status if you really want to focus on helping boost populations for severely declining butterflies. And so I put together a little example table. I've got my butterfly species that I pulled out of iNaturalist, their status pulled out of the State of the Butterflies report, and then also using the Vermont Butterfly Atlas website, although you can also use iNaturalist or Wikipedia to pull out their host plants. And of course, don't forget nectar plants for the adults as well. And you can use the Vermont Butterfly Atlas, that phenology or flight chart, to tell you when that butterfly is flying in the air, and you can match that up to the blooming time of different plant species. So now that you've got your butterfly list and your plant list, then you can go and figure out which ones are going to grow in your yard best. So I recommend using the plant search function on the Native Plant Trust website. They have a feature that has a bunch of different like selector options. These are just 3 of them, but they have a whole bunch of different specifications that you can use to look up, what kind of soil you have, or whether you're looking for additional plants for butterflies and all that kind of stuff. And that can point you towards a list of plant species, many of which they carry. And you can also visit the Vermont Audubon has a Finding Native Plants Nurseries in Vermont list that I will send out after the presentation. And another thing to keep in mind when you're building a pollinator garden is be prepared that it's going to get a little bit messy. So don't forget that host plants are, in fact, food plants for caterpillars, and you should expect that they're going to come through and nibble off the leaves. And one thing that might be a little bit of a consolation prize if you like to go out and look at your garden is that you can see this monarch here that's chewing on this milkweed has kind of an interesting jagged edge where they've eaten through the leaf. And an interesting thing is that sometimes the different patterns that they eat through the leaves can actually help you identify what kind of caterpillar or other insect is on your plant. So even though, your plants might not look their best, you might be able to tell what kind of insects you're supporting. But all of this is it's also important to take into account that what do you want? So you don't necessarily have to rip out your whole yard or change your entire garden to help pollinators. You can just do it by looking for, you want to help monarchs and add some milkweeds to your garden. Or you can look up a different species of butterfly and choose a couple of late flowering nectaring plants that can help them in the September time period when most people's gardens are pretty much dead. So this is very kind of work at your own pace and at your own scale. Anything you do is going to help pollinators. So just to kind of bring it back to the beginning, I wanted to highlight one more butterfly that's one of the common butterflies seen around Plymouth. And this was also, if you remember back to the beginning of the presentation, Margaret Fontaine's spark butterfly. And this is the mourning cloak. So these butterflies occur pretty much all over the United States. They go up into southern Canada, and as you might have guessed from Margaret Fontaine seeing them in France, they're also native to Europe and Asia. Now, they have a bunch of different names. Like I said, they're called mourning cloaks or Camberwell beauties, or also white petticoats. And one way to remember some of those names is by following a little story that Hugh Newman, who was a popular British entomologist, radio personality, told, and that he saw these butterflies a little bit as a young girl who's been dressed in mourning clothes for just months, and she's so sick of being in mourning clothes. And as she steps out, she defiantly lifts the edges of her dress just a few inches to show a couple inches of the little white petticoat underneath, which you can see in this kind of cream-colored border to the butterfly's wings. The mourning cloak is also a really interesting butterfly because they have the longest lifespan of any butterfly. They can live 11 to 12 months in total, and they overwinter as adults. So they go out right now, actually, they'll be going out and finding places in bark where bark is loose on the trees that they can kind of shove in to overwinter. And they actually have an antifreeze like substance that'll keep them alive through those low temperatures. And because they overwinter as adults, that also makes them one of the earliest flying butterflies that you'll see out in the spring. But of course, when you think of butterflies, you think of flowers. And there's not a whole lot of flowers out in that early spring period. But you'll actually more likely to find these butterflies on broken branches or woodpecker holes because they like to drink sap instead of flower nectar. Another thing that I find personally kind of interesting about these butterflies is that they are super aggressive, which is kind of an interesting tactic. They will sit out in display. So they'll sit out in an open area and the males will hope for females to come by. But If they see another mourning cloak, they will chase that mourning cloak. If they see a different butterfly, they will also chase that butterfly. If they see a bird fly overhead, they will chase that bird. And if you walk by, you might just have a butterfly fly towards you and angrily flap their wings at you, which has definitely happened to me. And also included their host plants are willows. So that kind of concludes our talk about butterflies. But I just wanted to do a quick plug for another VCE project, which is on pollinators. So if you do end up joining iNaturalist, or if you are already on it, you can join our Pollinator Interactions on Plants project. This project is very straightforward. It just involves taking pictures of insects that are on plants, particularly insects that are on flowers. And this can help us more broadly learn about the relationships between different species of plants and different species of insects. So, to wrap up, these and all of our other programs are all run by the Vermont Center for Ecostudies, where we believe that community science not only empowers us in our research, but it also builds community between people and their environment. And for the past 30 years, our team has brought volunteers on board to study high elevation nesting birds, the beloved common loon, giant silk moths, plant pollinator interactions, butterflies, ticks, and much more. And all of our data has been used to inform environmental policy in Vermont at the state, town, and individual levels. So I invite you to explore our website, which is btecostudies.org, and reach out if you have any questions or interested in volunteering with one of our projects. So, all right, that is the end of my presentation. And
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dana. That was wonderful. Great. Well, if folks have questions, feel free to pop those into the chat. Um, and we will get those answered for you. I did have a question while folks are thinking. Do you have a field guide or a book that you like to suggest folks if they're just starting out with butterfly ID?
yes, I do. And I think I'm going to have to take off my background, okay, to show it. So this is the one that I use. So Jeffrey Glassberg is one of the top lepidopterists in the United States. And this is his most recent Swift Guide to Butterflies. It's my favorite because it's a very visual guide. I'm a very visual person. So as you can see, similar to how I pointed out in the butterfly and moth features, this shows you directly with arrows and circles what the different key features are on different butterflies to help you identify different species. The one thing about this is that it is a North America book, so there's way more butterflies than we will have in the Northeast. But I pair it with iNaturalist, so using that Explore feature that I talked about, I find out what butterflies are near me, and then go to the section of the book and compare the species that we have there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's see. Any other questions? I mean, I have some others, so I'll just ask them.
Go for it.
Um, you may have alluded to this, but so there are host plants for the caterpillars to feed on.
Yeah.
Um, is the host plant is the plant the same that the butterfly gets nectar from? Or do they get it from other plants?
Yeah, so not necessarily. This is something that is kind of interesting when you look into. So, like I said, caterpillars are very specific in what they can eat. So they can only eat off of one plant or a bunch of related plants. But butterflies seem usually less picky. Some of them, like the bog copper that we talked about, will only go to cranberries. Monarchs prefer milkweed, but you'll see them on other plants. A lot of the adult butterflies will just like whatever's closest to them and looks tasty, they'll go to.
Okay, so for the bog copper, what is the caterpillar's preferred? Do they eat the bog cranberry?
Yep, yep. They're
Oh,
also so the bog cranberry is basically they spend their whole life situated around that one plant.
so
Yeah,
so cool.
which is why they're in trouble.
Yeah. Um, and then another one I was just thinking of is there any thought to look into do this kind of same project for moths? Are moths experiencing declines and or they're maybe just a little less like showy and people aren't as into them?
Yeah, so it's definitely they're a little less showy and people are a little less into them. We do have a project right now called that Kent is working on that's using an AI system, camera system to record moths. But a lot of people will go out. There's a person on iNaturalist, Joanne Russo, who is like the Vermont expert on moths. And you can find moth events, which are called mothballs, that people will hold throughout the summer. And it basically involves a bunch of people hanging out with a white sheet with a light shining on it at night. And you can just go and see a bunch of different moths that way. And you can do this in your backyard too. Um, and I don't know that we have a specific project on iNaturalist for moths, but certainly any moth species that you put up will go into our larger project that's kind of the parent project to the Butterfly Atlas called the Vermont Atlas of Life.
Mhm. Wonderful. Thank you. We do have another question here in the chat. Um, you mentioned that a lot of forest-based species of butterflies are the ones that are the most vulnerable. Are there species of plants you would recommend adding to lawns or gardens to support those vulnerable species?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I there's a lot of factors that go into impacting species, and some of them might be things like forest fragmentation. And so, your yard may or may not be able to help with that. A lot of those forest butterflies, their host plants are trees, and so having native trees around your yard is helpful. And especially, planting younger trees that have softer leaves for the caterpillars to eat. One that I know, and I don't know if people have looked at it, whether they use plants in people's yards. I know the spring ephemerals are ones that kind of help some of those species. I don't know how well they grow in gardens, but for instance, that West Virginia white, the rare butterfly, they rely on the toothworts. So we have the cut-leaved toothwort and the two-leaved toothwort. Um, and that's like the only plants that they use, similar to the bog copper. So having those in your garden could be helpful. In that particular group, the West Virginia white is only the populations only exist on like the western side of Vermont. So if you're in the east, you have to find another forest butterfly to support.
Mhm. Great. All right. Any other thoughts folks have before we wrap up? Did you mention what your favorite butterfly species was, Dana?
Oh, that is a good
It could
question.
be anywhere, not just Vermont.
Yeah. The only butterflies I know are in Vermont, although I
Okay.
was watching a live cam from Namibia today and was noticing that I could see the butterflies, and I was very excited about that. They were some species of white butterfly because they were
Cool.
white. Um, I think probably my favorite right now is the morning cloak because in my survey area this summer, I had one of those male morning cloaks that was always there. He was in the same spot every time I went out. And I really enjoyed him being aggressive because whenever he flew off, I could follow him and find a new butterfly. So,
That's awesome. So cool. Well, thank you so much, Dana. That was so informative and gets me really excited for spring and when the butterflies are out and about. And hopefully you all are feeling that way too. And yeah, have a great evening, everyone. We do have another upcoming event for Farm and Wilderness Conservation, which is a hike and tree planting project. We're going to be planting willow, live stakes, and speckled alder live stakes. Maybe they'll become hosts for butterflies someday. Caterpillars. And that is on November 9th. So if you want details for that, reach out. And I'm going to be sending some links that Dana mentioned as well to folks with the email address that you all provided when you registered. So be on the lookout for that as well. And yeah, have a great night, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us.
yeah, thank you all.